the Apache bride no man could love. Until the lonely rancher lifted her veil, she was known in the Apache community as the woman no one chose. People did not say it out loud, but everyone knew. When gatherings happened, when families spoke of matches and futures, her name never came up. Mothers would gently guide their sons away. Elders would change the subject. It was not because she was unkind or lazy. It was because of the veil, the quiet, and the story people believed they already knew. She lived at the edge of the settlement, in a small house that had once belonged to her aunt. The wind passed freely there, carrying dust and old songs. Every morning she woke before the sun, wrapped her shawl tightly, and tied the veil over her face before stepping outside. She moved with purpose, not hurry. She fetched water, prepared food, helped where help was needed. She did not complain. She did not ask for attention. The veil had been part of her life for many years. At first it was protection. Later it became habit. And eventually it became the reason people stopped seeing her at all. Children stared, then learned not to. Adults looked past her as if she were a shadow against the earth. She accepted it with a calm that came from long understanding. Some lives, she believed, were meant to be quiet. She had once imagined something different. When she was younger, before whispers followed her footsteps, she had dreamed of a simple home, laughter in the evenings, and someone who would sit beside her without fear or judgment. But time has a way of teaching people what to release. Hope slowly turned into acceptance, and acceptance into strength. Not far from the community, beyond the low hills and wide open land, lived a rancher who also knew silence well. He had come to the area years earlier, drawn by work and distance. He had lost much in his earlier life, things he did not speak of anymore. His ranch was modest but well kept. He rose early, worked hard, and spoke little. Neighbors described him as polite, reserved, and dependable. No one called him lonely, but loneliness lived with him like an old companion. His days followed the same pattern. Feed the animals, fix what needed fixing, sit on the porch in the evenings as the sky changed color. Sometimes he listened to the radio, sometimes he didn't. He was not bitter. He was simply tired of expecting more than life seemed willing to give. He had heard of the woman, of course. Everyone had. The stories were vague, shaped more by imagination than truth. He never asked questions. He had learned that people's pasts were not his business unless they chose to share. One afternoon, an elder from the Apache community came to see him. The visit was unexpected. The rancher offered water and listened quietly as the elder spoke of practical matters first, land boundaries, seasonal concerns, before finally pausing. "There is a matter," the elder said carefully, "one that requires a steady man." The rancher did not interrupt. "There is a woman," the elder continued. "She has lived alone for too long. The community worries. Not because she cannot care for herself, but because life should not be faced alone forever." The rancher understood what was being said, though not yet why he was being told. "She needs a home where she will be respected," the elder said. "No expectations beyond decency, no harsh words, no curiosity that turns into cruelty." The rancher remained quiet for a long moment. He looked out at the land, stretching wide and open. He thought of his evenings, of the empty chair across from him, of how silence can be peaceful but also heavy. "What does she want?" he asked finally. The elder nodded as if he had been waiting for that question. "She wants peace, nothing more." That night the woman sat alone in her house, mending a tear in her shawl. When the elder visited her, she listened without surprise. Life had taught her not to expect sudden joy, but she still respected honesty. "He is not like others," the elder said. "He has agreed to meet you, only to meet." She nodded. That was enough. When they met, it was simple. No ceremony, no audience. The rancher stood with his hat in his hands, respectful and unsure. She kept her veil on, her posture calm. They spoke little. Words were not needed. There was no promise of love, no illusion of romance. only an understanding between two people who had lived long enough to know what mattered. He noticed her hands first. Strong, steady, skilled. Hands that had worked hard and carried weight. She noticed his eyes, not curious, not judging, just present. They agreed without pressure, without celebration, without fear. For the woman, it felt like stepping into a different kind of quiet, one that did not press down on her chest. One that did not ask her to hide more than she already had. For the rancher, it felt like opening a door he had long assumed was closed forever. As she packed her few belongings, she paused at the doorway of her old home. She did not cry. She simply touched the wall once as if thanking it for shelter. The past had shaped her, but it would not hold her. The land was wide, the future unknown. And for the first time in many years, neither of them walked toward tomorrow completely alone. The journey to the ranch was quiet. The woman sat in the back of the truck, her small bundle beside her, the veil resting gently over her face. She watched the land pass by, wide stretches of earth, open sky, and long roads that seemed to lead to places where the past could not easily follow. She did not know what waited ahead, but she knew she was leaving behind the weight of being watched and whispered about. The rancher drove carefully, as if the road itself deserved respect. He did not try to fill the silence. He understood that some silences were not empty but thoughtful. Every now and then he glanced at the mirror, not to stare, but to make sure she was comfortable. When the road grew rough, he slowed down without being asked. When they arrived, the ranch did not look grand or impressive. It was simple and practical. A small house, a stable and fences that showed signs of careful repair. Everything had its place. Nothing felt rushed or neglected. The woman noticed this immediately. It told her something about the man who lived there. He showed her inside without ceremony. "You can have this room," he said, opening a door to a clean, quiet space with a window facing the land. "There's no rule here. You decide what you need." She nodded, her voice soft when she thanked him. It was the first time she had spoken more than a few words to him, and he listened closely, as if her voice mattered. The first days passed slowly. They moved around each other with care, like people learning a new rhythm. They shared meals, sitting across the table, speaking only when needed. The rancher cooked simply. She offered to help, and when he accepted, it felt like a small bridge forming between them. She woke early, as she always had. Without being asked, she began to help around the ranch, sweeping, organizing, tending to small tasks. The rancher noticed, but he never treated her help as something he deserved. Each time he thanked her sincerely. There were no questions about her veil, no requests to explain her past. The rancher did not try to earn trust by demanding it. He gave it freely, and that made it easier for her to breathe. At night, she sat near the window of her room, listening to the quiet sounds of the land. The silence here felt different. It was not filled with judgment or curiosity. It was open, patient. Slowly, her shoulders relaxed. Slowly, the tightness she had carried for years began to loosen. The rancher, meanwhile, struggled with his own thoughts. He wondered if he was doing enough, if his quiet nature felt cold to her. He wanted her to feel safe, but he did not know how to show it without crossing boundaries. So he chose consistency. Every morning he greeted her. Every evening he made sure the doors were secure. Small actions, steady and reliable. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by unexpectedly. The rancher met him outside, keeping his voice calm. The neighbor glanced toward the house, curiosity flickering briefly across his face. The rancher shifted his stance, subtly blocking the view. The message was clear without words. Inside, the woman saw this from the window. For the first time, someone had protected her privacy without being asked. The realization settled in her chest quietly, like warmth. Days turned into weeks. The community began to notice her absence, but there were no rumors reaching her ears now. The ranch was far enough that gossip lost its power. Here, she was not the veiled woman. She was simply someone who lived there. They spoke more as time passed. Not about the past, but about small things, the weather, the animals, the changing seasons. She laughed once, unexpectedly, at something he said about a stubborn fence. The sound surprised them both. He smiled, not because it was rare, but because it was real. One evening she prepared a meal from memory, a dish her mother had once made. She set it on the table carefully. The rancher ate slowly, respectfully. "This is good," he said, meaning more than the taste. She felt pride, something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. There was still distance between them, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was thoughtful, chosen. Late at night, when the rancher sat on the porch, he thought about how the house felt less empty. He did not feel the need to change her or fix her. He simply felt grateful for the quiet presence that now shared his space. For the woman, each day built on the last. She still wore the veil. She still guarded her heart, but she no longer felt invisible. She was seen without being examined, valued without being tested. This was not love, not yet. It was something slower, steadier, and just as important. It was peace. Time moved differently on the ranch. Days did not rush past. They unfolded slowly, like pages turned with care. The woman began to understand the rhythm of the place, the way the morning light touched the land, the quiet work that filled the hours, and the calm evenings that arrived without announcement. She still wore her veil every day. It was not because the rancher asked her to. He never mentioned it at all. The veil stayed because it was part of how she had survived for so long. Removing it felt like standing without armor, but something had changed. Here, the veil did not feel like a wall. It felt more like a door she could choose to open one day. She learned the ranch worked quickly. The animals responded to her gentle movements. She spoke to them softly, not with commands, but with patience. The rancher noticed how even the most restless animals seemed calmer around her. He did not comment much, but his respect for her grew quietly, the way strong things often do. They spent long hours working side by side without needing conversation. Sometimes he explained a task, and she listened carefully. Other times she figured things out on her own, and he let her. There was no need to correct or control. That mutual understanding built something solid between them. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled in faster than expected. The wind picked up and the sky darkened. They hurried to secure what they could. At one point, she slipped slightly on the wet ground. Before she could react, the rancher reached out and steadied her. His grip was firm but gentle. He let go immediately, as if afraid to overstep. She looked up at him, surprised, not by the touch, but by how safe it felt. He met her gaze without hesitation, without looking away. For a brief moment, neither of them moved. Then the rain came harder and they returned to work. That night she sat awake longer than usual. Her thoughts were not heavy, just full. She realized something important. She trusted him, not because he had promised anything, but because he had never taken anything. The rancher, too, felt the shift. He found himself thinking about her during the day, wondering if she had eaten enough, if the work was too tiring. He reminded himself not to assume, not to decide things for her. He respected her strength, and he did not want to replace one kind of silence with another. They began sharing stories slowly, small ones at first. He spoke about his ranch, how he had built it piece by piece. She spoke about the land she grew up on, careful to avoid details that still felt too sharp. He did not push. He listened. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sky change colors, he mentioned a scar on his hand. He did not explain how it happened. He simply said it was from a time when he had to learn things the hard way. She nodded, understanding more than he said. It was the first time she realized he, too, carried a past he did not display openly. As weeks passed, her movements became more relaxed. She no longer flinched at sudden sounds. She walked freely around the ranch, her steps confident. The veil remained, but it no longer defined her presence. She was part of the place now. A letter arrived one day from the community she had left behind. She did not open it immediately. She placed it on the table and looked at it for a long time. The rancher noticed and said nothing. Later that night she opened it alone. It spoke of ordinary things, updates, small concerns, no judgment, no regret. She folded it carefully and felt a quiet sense of closure. That evening she joined the rancher on the porch without being asked. She sat beside him, not across. It was a small change, but it meant everything. He did not comment. He simply shifted slightly to make space. They did not speak much that night. They did not need to. The woman began to wonder what it would feel like to remove the veil, not because she was asked, but because she wanted to. The thought scared her, but it also filled her with a cautious hope. She realized that here, her face would not be the first thing that defined her. The rancher never imagined asking. To him, the veil was part of her choice, and choice mattered. But sometimes when she laughed softly or spoke with warmth, he wondered what expression she hid, not out of curiosity, but out of a desire to know her fully when she was ready. One morning she surprised him by preparing breakfast before he woke. When he came into the kitchen, the smell of food filled the room. She stood there, a little unsure, waiting for his reaction. He smiled, genuine and grateful. "This means a lot," he said simply. She felt something tighten in her chest, not painfully but deeply. It was the feeling of being appreciated without conditions. As the days grew longer, so did the silence between them, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with shared understanding, mutual respect, and something else neither dared to name yet. The veil still remained, but now it rested not on fear. It had been months since the woman had arrived at the ranch, and the quiet rhythm of life had grown into something steady and dependable. The days were full of work, yet the evenings carried a peaceful stillness that neither of them had known for a long time. The rancher had grown used to her presence in ways he could not have expected. He noticed the small gestures, how she set the table, how she tended the animals, how her laughter, though rare, filled the house with warmth. She, in turn, had begun to see him as someone who respected her without needing to change her, someone whose steady quiet was a shelter rather than a judgment. One late afternoon, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, casting golden light across the fields. They had finished feeding the animals and were taking a brief rest on the porch. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of grass and earth. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, yet comfortable with the other's presence. Silence had become a language between them, and it was not heavy anymore. It was reassuring. The rancher glanced at her from the corner of his eye. She was watching the horizon, her veil fluttering slightly in the wind. He had seen her veil every day since she had arrived, always neat, always shielding her face. But he noticed now something different, how her eyes, just above the fabric, seemed softer, lighter. She no longer seemed defensive or distant. There was trust there, quiet but unmistakable. He had wanted to ask for weeks. He had rehearsed the words in his mind countless times, fearing that a wrong phrase might push her away. And yet, he realized that he could not wait any longer. The longing to see the face that had become so familiar in voice and gesture outweighed his caution. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, then spoke gently. "If you are ready, may I see your face?" His voice was calm, almost hesitant, filled with respect rather than demand. She froze. The question was simple, but it carried weight. For years she had hidden behind the veil, letting the world see only what she allowed. The veil had been a shield, a comfort, and sometimes a prison. And now here was someone asking, not forcing, not commanding, but asking, if she would let it fall. Her heart raced, but it was not fear that held her. It was uncertainty, and a hint of hope she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time. She turned slightly to face him. Her hands tightened on the edge of the shawl draped over her shoulders. Her mind raced through memories, both painful and tender, of the life she had led before arriving at the ranch. She thought of the whispers, the people who had judged without knowing, the loneliness that had defined her existence. And then she looked at the rancher, his steady gaze, his gentle manner, the quiet patience that had welcomed her without question. She realized that no one had ever looked at her this way before. No one had ever asked her to trust without trying to control, to reveal without exposing, to be herself without fear. Her fingers moved slowly to the edge of the veil. The rancher watched without blinking, without moving, giving her all the space she needed. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of solitude in that one moment. Then, carefully, deliberately, she lifted the veil. The fabric slipped away from her face, and the light touched her features for the first time in front of someone who mattered. The rancher looked at her. The scars, the marks of a past she had endured, were there, but they did not frighten him. They did not make him turn away. Instead, he saw the woman behind them, the strength, the resilience, the quiet courage that had carried her through life. And in that moment, he knew that his admiration and respect were no longer limited to her actions or her presence. They extended fully to the person she truly was. Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear, but from relief. For the first time in her life, she was seen fully, without judgment or pity. She felt her chest loosen, her shoulders release a tension she had carried for years. She had been cautious, protective, and hesitant, but now she understood something fundamental. She was not alone, and she was not unworthy of care or affection. The rancher spoke softly, his voice carrying warmth and certainty. "You are not what anyone said about you. You are more, stronger, wiser, kinder, and I see all of it." Her lips quivered, but she managed a small, tentative smile. She had not expected these words, these feelings, these acknowledgments. She had not expected to find someone who could look beyond the veil and see her essence. And yet, here he was, offering acceptance, admiration, and a kind of love that had nothing to do with appearances. Days turned into weeks after that moment, and something shifted in the rhythm of the ranch. Their routines continued, but a new layer of connection wove itself into the fabric of everyday life. Meals were shared with laughter that came more easily. Evenings on the porch were filled with quiet conversations, with shared stories of childhood memories, of small joys, of dreams once thought impossible. The veil had not been the only barrier lifted. Walls within their hearts began to come down as well. The woman found herself smiling more openly, moving freely without hesitation, and even daring to voice her thoughts in ways she had never allowed herself before. The rancher responded in kind, not with grand gestures, but with consistent kindness, patience, and a willingness to listen. He continued his work around the ranch, but now he looked forward to the moments they shared as equals, companions, and gradually, as something deeper that neither needed to define with words just yet. Neighbors who had once whispered about her absence began to see a different reality. She was no longer a figure to pity or to avoid. She was part of the ranch life, valued, respected, and most importantly, happy. She moved among the animals, the fields, and the house with quiet confidence. And though the scars on her face remained, they had lost their power to define her. The rancher's acceptance had transformed how she viewed herself, giving her courage she had long forgotten she possessed. One evening, as the sun set in hues of orange and purple, the woman and the rancher sat together on the porch. She rested her hand lightly on the arm of the chair, close enough that he felt her presence, yet respecting the space between them. The wind carried the scent of the earth and grass, mingling with the warmth of the day. For a long moment they simply sat, neither speaking, neither needing to. Finally she looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "I never thought anyone would see me," she whispered. He smiled, quiet but unwavering. "I see you," he said, "all of you. Not just what is easy, not just what is visible. I see everything that makes you you." And in that simple exchange, something profound settled between them. A bond forged not by grand gestures or spoken promises, but by trust, respect, and the courage to reveal oneself fully. The moment marked a turning point, a beginning of something neither of them had dared to hope for. a love built on honesty, patience, and the strength of two hearts choosing each other freely. That night, as they watched the stars emerge over the wide, open land, the woman allowed herself a small, private smile. The veil had come off, but more importantly, a veil over her own heart had lifted as well. She felt lighter, freer, and for the first time in many years truly seen. And the rancher, sitting beside her, knew that he had witnessed the unveiling of something far deeper than appearance. He had seen a soul and chosen to cherish it, unconditionally. The trust, respect, and quiet affection they had nurtured had transformed their lives. And for both of them, it was only the beginning of a love that would shape every day that followed. The days after that evening felt different, not because anything dramatic happened, but because everything felt more real. The woman woke each morning without the familiar weight in her chest. She no longer reached for the veil out of habit. Sometimes she wore it when the wind was harsh or the sun was strong, but often she did not. When she looked into the small mirror in her room, she no longer searched for what others might judge. She simply saw herself. The rancher noticed the change right away. Not just the absence of the veil, but the way she carried herself. Her steps were lighter. Her voice was steadier. She met his eyes without hesitation. He did not treat her differently, and that mattered more than anything else. He did not celebrate the change or point it out. He accepted it as naturally as he accepted the sunrise and the work of the day. Their life continued much as before. Animals still needed care. Fences still needed fixing. Meals still needed to be cooked. But now there was an ease between them that had not existed before. They talked more freely. Sometimes they spoke about small plans for the ranch, other times about memories they had never shared with anyone else. One evening she told him about her childhood, not the painful parts but the simple ones. She spoke of running barefoot on warm ground, of songs sung softly at night, of elders who taught patience and respect for the land. He listened closely, storing every word as if it were something precious. When she finished, she looked at him with a hint of uncertainty, but he only smiled. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said. She realized then that trust no longer felt risky. It felt natural. The rancher shared more of himself too. He spoke of leaving behind a life that no longer fit him, of choosing solitude because it felt safer than disappointment. He admitted that when he first agreed to meet her, he expected nothing. He had not believed that something meaningful could still find him. "I was wrong," he said quietly. She did not respond with words. She simply reached out and rested her hand on his. The touch was gentle, but it carried meaning deeper than anything either of them could have said. As the seasons changed, the ranch changed with them. The land grew greener, then golden. The work grew harder at times, but it was shared. They learned each other's strengths and limits. When one grew tired, the other stepped in without being asked. There was no keeping score, no silent expectations. People from nearby places began to visit the ranch again. Some came to trade, some to talk. The woman felt a familiar tightness at first, memories of old judgments rising uninvited. But the rancher stood beside her, not in front, not behind, just beside. And people took their cue from him. They spoke to her directly. They listened when she spoke. Slowly, the world adjusted. One afternoon, a woman from her old community came to visit. The meeting was careful at first, filled with polite words and pauses. But as they talked, the tension eased. The visitor looked at her closely, then smiled. "You look at peace," she said. The woman nodded. "I am." After the visit, she sat quietly for a long time. The rancher did not interrupt. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm. "I used to think my life was already decided," she said, "that I would always be the one people looked past." He shook his head gently. "You were never that," he said. "They just didn't know how to see you." That night she slept deeply, without dreams that pulled her backward. Their bond grew not from grand promises, but from shared days, from morning light through dusty windows, from meals eaten slowly, from laughter that came unexpectedly and stayed longer each time. Love, when it finally made itself known, did not arrive loudly. It settled in quietly, like something that had been waiting patiently all along. One evening, as they walked the edge of the land together, she stopped and looked out across the fields. The sky was wide and open, just like it had been the day she arrived. She thought of the woman she had been then, careful, guarded, unsure of her place. "I never thanked you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For not trying to fix me," she said. "For letting me be who I am." He smiled softly. "I never saw you as something that needed fixing." She turned to him then fully, without fear. "I choose this life," she said, "with you, not because I need shelter, but because I want to be here." The words stayed between them, strong and steady. He nodded, emotion clear in his eyes. "I choose you," he said simply. From that day on, the ranch no longer felt like just a place of work. It felt like home, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. Because two people who had known loneliness had chosen to walk forward together. The woman no longer thought of herself as someone no one could love. She understood now that love was not about meeting expectations or hiding scars. It was about being seen and still being chosen. The rancher, once content with solitude, now found joy in shared silence, in shared effort, in shared dreams. He did not feel rescued, and he did not feel like a savior. He felt equal, grounded, and deeply grateful. Years later, people would sometimes speak of the ranch and the quiet couple who lived there. Some would remember the old stories and shake their heads at how wrong they had been. Others would simply see two people working side by side, living simply, loving deeply. And that was enough. Because in the end, the Apache bride no man could love had never been unlovable at all. She had only been waiting for someone who could see past the veil.